because I hadn't been well for a few weeks, I didn't actually prepare anything for my soapbox slot. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to tell Zoe I can't do it. And then I realised that I wrote an article about how my first self-help mutual support group changed my life. And I wrote it for a small survivor charity, national charity, that I've been a member of for over 40 years, Depression UK. There's now sadly only about 200 members, but we are trying to build it up. And membership is free, if anyone's interested. Anyway, the theme for the particular newsletter was groups. So I decided to write about my very first self-help group, which was a local group attached to the charity. And I thought, well, if I just read this out, okay, right. I hope you don't mind if I just read this out. What I've written is, I had experienced mental health problems since a child and became severely mentally unwell when I was 20, resulting in my being unable to work in paid employment for 5 years. At that time, bearing in mind this is, when is it, 70s, when there was terrible stigma. I don't think there is stigma now, but there was then, believe me. And at that time, I was overwhelmed by feelings of shame and stigma. And I longed to meet others that were experiencing similar mental distress, as I felt that we could be mutually supportive in some way. But I didn't know how to find them. In those days, self-help and mutual support groups were unheard of, so I didn't even know what I was desperately searching for. Well, I eventually recovered enough to get a part-time job as a hospital domestic worker, but I became very unwell again a few years later. Thankfully, sleeping tablets and self-regulated dosage of diazepam enabled me to stay in work, and I experienced no side effects whatsoever from these tablets. But again, I was desperate to find others who were experiencing similar debilitating and frightening symptoms as I was, because I knew that our mutual support and acceptance would be a great help. So I went to a local Mind group, but this was run by volunteers for patients. People weren't called survivors in those days. And there was a clear division between the volunteers and the patients. And I didn't fit into either category, so I found it of no use. Then one day, I picked up a magazine in the waiting room, just a sort of women's magazine, in the waiting room of the hospital waiting room that I was cleaning. And I flicked through it, and there was an article about depression and anxiety, which described many of the symptoms I was experiencing. And I just felt a huge surge of hope, because it was a mutual support organisation. So I wrote off, and I immediately got a very... Oh, good. Is it? Oh, right. Well, I better say it very quickly. Skip forward. I joined this group, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was actually held in a squat that had been set up by some anarchists. But it didn't matter, because we were all in the same boat. We all took off our masks and talked deeply together. We became friends. We went out together at weekends. I made friends with, in particular, 2 of the ladies there. I'm really skipping forward now. And that group helped me to face past traumas. And, as I got better, I'd left school at 15, no qualifications. They encouraged me to do O-levels, as it was in those days. I got my Open University degree. later on, I got a job as a mental health outreach worker until I retired. And I also went and lived and worked on a kibbutz. I travelled the world. I will always be a mental health activist. And I'll finish there. But peer support groups are the best thing in the world. And we must fight for them.